Hello.
We're live. Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 19 of our Uncut Exception mini sessions. This will be our first episode for 2021, and we will go back to doing these streams weekly every Saturday, 9 p.m. And for this episode, we have two cool topics for you.
Cool.
We'll start with me, where I will share about um, Houdini Paint API, and Dorell will be sharing about an introduction to GROQ or GROQ. I don't know how to read it. So let's just
That's right.
get in. Let's just get into it. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Uh, okay. So for this session, I'll be sharing about the Houdini Paint API. So before we get into that, let's take a quick review of how like browsers display or how browsers work behind the scenes. So when browsers receive our HTML, CSS, we're familiar that it parses the DOM, right, which are the JavaScript objects that represents our page. And then from that, combined with the CSS object model, there's the render tree, which contains like the styles for each element already. And then the browser will do a layout, which is the step where it figures out um, how big each element is and where in the page are they going to be positioned. And finally, the browsers will paint our page, which is like painting pixels where so that the user um, can actually see our page or the different elements in our page. So Houdini, where should I go? Houdini. So Houdini is like a collective term for a group of APIs, for a group of like low-level browser APIs that allows us to extend CSS by hooking into these different um, steps in the browser's rendering like flow. So particularly the layout and the painting steps. So it's composed of different low-level APIs. Some of them are not even like implemented yet, like the parser or font matrix APIs. But um, for now, we'll be focusing on the Paint API, which is already shipped in most browsers and in development and under consideration for Safari and Firefox. And there's also a polyfill for this, which we will like take a look later. So the Paint API allows us to extend like the browser's like paint step when it paints our page. So how do we use it? Let's just do a quick like demo. So here, this is our page. We have a 500 pixel by 500 pixel box, which is just a div. And let's use let's use a Paint API to like add a background to this um, box. So if we go back to our code, our CSS, this is our box CSS. Um, so normally when we add background, we can use like background image, right? Where we pass in the URL to our image that we want to use as a background for this element. However, we can also use a Paint API, like a Paint Worklet, which is some JavaScript code that will do that will generate the background for us. So let's take a look at an example. So if there's a really cool resource site called Houdini.how, it contains a lot of like Paint API worklets created by the community and the Chrome team. So let's just pick one. I like the circles. So all you have to do is, before we even get into that, we need to load our worklet. So a worklet is a JavaScript file. So paint worklet module. Oops. And that works. So we just loaded our circles module. I mean circles like paint worklet. So this is how we register a paint API worklet. So this will now let the browser know that whenever we want to paint circles, it will use this JavaScript file to paint the circles. So how do we actually use it? So after we register it like this, back in our CSS, we can now do background image, and instead of like URL or whatever image, we can call paint, which will tell the browser to use like a paint worklet, and then pass it the name of the worklet. So it's called circles, and as you see, have circles already on the page. So these circles are like randomly generated by the circles paint worklet. It's not loaded. It's not being loaded from like the network, and it's re-rendered every time the browser does a repaint of the page. So if we try to like resize the browser, for example, you see resizing the browser causes the browser to like paint the page again, and so the paint worklet gets executed again, thus generating like a new random like position for the circles. So that's like how easy it is to use paint worklets. We can also customize this. For example, currently it's only drawing like 5 circles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even though they are randomly positioned, there's always 5 circles. But you can pass in like sort of arguments or like parameters to the worklet, and that is using custom properties, or commonly known as CSS variables. So we can add in a num circles, let's say 10, called num circles. Let's check the worklet. Yeah, it's called num circles. I misspelled it. Gosh, now we have 10 circles, even though we resize. Even though we repaint the page and they are randomly positioned again, so there's always 10. Let's try 100 for fun, and there will be 100 circles. So that makes it easy to like play around with values, experiment with like the design that we want. And if we inspect here, there's no like image being loaded. It's an actual, it's like being painted by the browser directly on our div element. So that's cool. So there's, depending on your worklets, depending on how the worklet is written, it can accept different custom properties. So for the particular paint worklet that we use, the Houdini circles, it can accept like the maximum and minimum radius, the colors allowed, the random colors for the circles, etc. So yeah, we can play around with those just by changing like CSS custom properties. So we can easily change values through DevTools, like what we do with other CSS properties. So we can like change this dynamically, and then the browser will in real time show us the results. So that's nice. Okay, so that's a quick intro of like how to use a CSS or like a Houdini Paint Worklet. Again, there's a site houdini.how. This is like a collection of like CSS Paint Worklets for now that are contributed by the community. You can check out some cool effects here, like for example, this confetti or multiple underlines or sparkles, etc. So we're just using circles. Okay, so now we know how to use it. Let's take a look at how we can make our own paint worklet. Because in case we have some cool ideas in mind, then let's make it into a worklet. So first, let's delete everything first. That's using the circles. So we're back to our empty square. So let's say we want a worklet that will draw like an X in our box. That's a very simple one to like illustrate how to create paint worklets. So we just want a diagonal line from the top left to the bottom right, and then from the top right to the bottom left. So sort of forming an X on our box, but as a paint worklet. So let's call it diagonal lines. So diagonal lines that worklet.js. So okay, so here's our worklet file. We need to define a class. You can call it whatever you want. The important part is we have to register string and give it a name. So lines. So this will be the name of our worklet when we use it in CSS. So and then the second parameter will be the class definition of our worklet. So that's nice. Before we write more code, let's load our worklet first. So the same as we did before. Okay, worklet that add module. Sorry, I don't think you can see my screen. Okay, so add module. Diagonal lines that worklet.js. Okay, let's save that and back in our page. Oops. Paint doesn't exist. What? Okay, I think this is paint worklet.add module. Is this even correct? Okay, yeah, it's not yet done. So it's registering, but paint worklets have a required function called paint, which is the function that the browser will call to actually run our worklet. So now there are no errors because this is required. Okay, so let's define our paint function now. So the paint function accepts several parameters. One will be the context. So this context variable or like parameter is similar to like a canvas context object. So if you've used like the HTML5 like canvas API before to draw like lines and graphics, so it's a similar API. The second parameter will be the geometry. This represents the element where we will be painting to. So this will contain the dimensions of our box, for example, or whichever element we're running this worklet for. And finally, some props. So these props will be the custom properties that we use to customize our paint worklet. So we will use this in a bit. But for now, let's start with painting a very basic X. So let's start with, okay, I'm just going to write random code here, but if you're wondering, this will be similar to Canvas context API, something like that. Yeah, so the Canvas rendering context. So the methods that I'll be using here will be similar to the methods that you will use for the Canvas rendering context. So I'll just continue and write some code. So move to the top left to 0, 0. And then I will draw a line to the bottom right, which will be geometry.width and geometry.height. So this is the size, like the width and height of our box or element we're painting to. And then select that stroke. This will like draw our first line. Let's see if it worked. Okay, it didn't work because we didn't use our paint worklet yet. So let's use background image, paint, and what are we going to paint? Whatever the name of our worklet. So let's try. So here we get our first line. Let's draw our second line. We create a new path. We move our like context to the top right now. So like let's geometry that width subs and 0, and draw a line to the bottom left. So that height, and then draw the line. Oops. Draw the line. So here we have an X. So this is very basic example, but we drew the X without using like an image, but using a CSS Houdini Paint Worklet. So okay, this is very simple, just black lines. Let's say we want the user of our worklet to customize our lines, right? So different users who will use this worklet, they might want different colors, different thickness for the lines. So let's provide those like customizations through CSS custom properties. So let's say we want the user to say line color, let's say red, and then line width would be like 5px, for example. So we want them to be able to do that, but it's not working because we didn't implement it yet. So these custom properties, they will be accessible through the props parameter in our paint function. So let's plug it first. So props, as you see, there's nothing. There's size 0. There are no custom properties recognized by our paint worklet. That's because our paint worklet doesn't know which custom properties it should expect. And in order to fix that, we have to tell our worklet, like we have to define in our worklet which custom properties to look for. So that's achieved through a static property called input properties. And we just return a list of the custom properties that we expect. So line color, and then line width. So let's save it. And now we have 2 properties. So that seems to be working. So how do we get these properties? We can go get props.get and then the name of our property. So let's copy paste. Let's log both of them for now. So here we have our line color, which is red, and our line width, which is 5px. As you see, they're not being displayed as string. And here we already see another Houdini API in action already. We see that our properties are presented as a CSS unparsed value object. So this is also already a Houdini API called the type object model, I think. So the type like API, they provide us like a JavaScript API to interact with like CSS values. So instead of just getting like a string of like the values that we pass, it's wrapped as a JavaScript object that we can work with. So let's see. But there's still another like issue here. As we can see, it's unparsed value, meaning Houdini or like the browser doesn't understand, okay, what does red mean? What does 5px mean? So they're still being treated as a string. So to resolve that, we have to use another Houdini API called the Properties and Values API. So Properties and Values API, they allow us to define types for our custom properties. So it's like TypeScript, but for custom properties. I don't know, that's maybe a good analogy or not. So basically what they let us do is allows us to define what values are expected for type color and what values are expected for line width, because currently they're just being treated as strings. So to use them, we can do css.register property. So we have to pass in like 4 properties here. First will be the name. So this is like the name of our custom property, so line color. Syntax, this is where we define what are the expected values here. So there are different syntax keywords available in CSS. So we can check them here. There's a lot. It can be a length or like colors, which supports any way of defining colors like RGB or HSL or just the color keywords. So they will all work. So image, URL, etc. So in our case, we need color. So syntax should be color. Pass in inherits. So if you want this custom property to be inherited by like the children elements of wherever we define them. So let's just say false. I don't want to. And initial value. So this allows us to define like a default value for this custom property in case the user doesn't define this in their CSS. So let's say the default value is black. Okay. And let's do the same for line width also. So line width, so it's not color anymore. This will be length. And let's say 1px. So what we're doing here, we're essentially defining what are the expected values of our custom properties, and then some initial values, etc. And so if we go back to our demo, our page, we can see that they are not unparsed values anymore. The color is now a style value, and then 5px is now a unit value, which is correct. So see here, we're defining red. Let's convert it to toString. So here we get the RGB value, which is like a normalized value for our colors. So even though we define red or we define like HSL, and HSL, so 120, let's say 100%, it will be normalized to like RGB equivalent for that color. So I realized this is probably why. Let's try using the color picker. Green, okay. Okay, even though you define hex, it will be normalized to like RGB, so that's nice. Anyway, let's just use red. So get red. And for the unit value or like the line length, it will also always normalize it to pixels. So even though you pass in like 5 rem or like 5 root em, it will always give us the pixel value, because when working with the context API or like the canvas-ish context here, we can only draw through like pixels, with pixel units. So 5 RAM in our case would be 80 pixels, so we can use 80 directly. So now let's use those values in our worklet. So we have to use red and 80 for the line width and then the line color. So to do that, again, this is like context, like canvas rendering context API methods and properties. So context that stroke style, that's how we define colors, and context that line width, that's how we define how thick our strokes are. So let's hide them. And you see here, we're now able to customize our paint worklet through custom properties. So let's say we remove this, it will just fall back to the default values that we defined in our when we registered our custom properties. And again, we can play around with them directly through DevTools. Let's say you can use the color picker, and you will see like real-time feedback on the changes that we make. And let's say 5 rem might be too much. Let's say 4, 3, 2. I don't know what happened. 3, 2. Okay, so that's it. So this is just a simple Paint Houdini Paint API demo. But again, let your creativity run wild and make your own like paint worklets depending on what you need. And there's a lot of existing demos already in Houdini.how. And I mentioned earlier, for browsers that don't support, if you want to use like the Houdini Paint API on browsers that don't support it yet, you can use the CSS Paint polyfill. So just load it in your page, and then it will just work. And what else? Yeah, I think that's it for me about Houdini. And thank you very much. Okay, let's see. Since it's just me and Dorell, if you have questions, and if you're like watching and you have questions, just leave them in the comments and we will answer them after Dorell's talk. So that's it for me, and let's proceed to the next session, which will be introduction to GROQ by Dorell James. Go, Dorell.
Hello, bye. Okay. Let me share my screen. Um, oh no, I don't know how to use this anymore. All right, here we go. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I'll be talking about GROQ, GROQ, and this talk is basically just an introduction. However, mm, is my screen visible? I'm not so sure. Right. All right. Thanks. You hear me? You can hear me, right? Okay. 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 Good. So I'll be talking about GROQ. Basically, it stands for Graph Relational Object Queries, and it's a declarative language designed to query collections of largely schema-less JSON documents. So if you have you've been working and dealing with you know JSON and you hate it so much, or just to just understand how it is structured, doesn't make sense, you're having a hard time, and this group here is really perfect. It's gonna solve all your problems, guys. And here's let's proceed to know more. All right. Um, Before I continue, this group is also created by the popular Sanity.io content platform. If you know, if I say it differently, it's the CMS. Um, yeah, I hope you gonna check them out. Let's play here. Group.dev. So, yep, I need to change my share screen. Right, let's play group.dev. Oops. Alright, I'm not so sure if I'm visible. I should have done this before. Anyhow, so this is a Greek arcade. This is a playground basically for us to understand what is Greek. Um, in your left, this one in this area, you are seeing a JSON, an array of objects, user ID, ID, the title, completed. So you can think of this like some to dos. So you have user ID, user, and here is your query. So if you want to fetch some data, if you want to get, or whatever you make your data, you you make a query and you specify it declaratively. So you write what you want, and then if you hit this button, and we will able to get the data that we want, however we specified it. So before we proceed, and I will not explain this, in very detail, but we will go through that in the next slides. But I think it's just important. At least I'll be able to explain some points and some parts here. So the asterisk here denotes we are querying everything. So if I just use the asterisk here, is will just basically you know give us everything that we have on our left, and get the same output. But we don't want to do that. It's useless, right? If we do that. So inside the square brackets, we can pass in some filters. And we basically have two filters here, denoted by this, and. So in programming, we also use this ampersand operator, right, to do that. So here we're specifying that in our JSON, we want to have this condition that in completed, we want it to return all the true. So all true here. So if we have false here, this shouldn't be returned. And right. So and in the next statement or expression, we have here a user ID, and we only want to return denoted by this equal operator with two. So we have user ID two here down below. This is where it is. I don't know where it starts, but here it is. So it starts from here. And after this uh, curly brackets, we return the title. So that's the reason why you only get the title. But if I add in, say, completed here, right, then I'll also be able to get the data. If I don't want to kind of like, make this kind of, I call this projections. So we want to kind of like transform data in a way that what we require only. So if I don't want to do that, so it basically returns as all the fields that were originally in our JSON file. Okay, so yeah. So if I also don't want to do that, and it's pretty much the same. Now it returns all the to-dos that are completed. So that it doesn't filter now the user ID, but if I put it back, um, only the user ID 2 is returned. All right. So I don't want to take too much time here and explaining this one. I want to make sure that I can explain this more in detail in my next slides. So here we go. So that was the arcade, by the way. There's a playground for us to try, experiment, etc., etc. And from here on, I want to share something really opinionated. This is basically my opinion on the matter when I was, based from my experience, my learnings, when I was using GROQ. So here, I want to say that you can think of this as a GraphQL alternative, and here's why. For example, before I proceed, GraphQL is also a declarative, query for your APIs, right? So you can basically, pop in a GraphQL, uh, and then attach it in your REST APIs or your database, whatever it is that you want, right? So here in this example, it solves, by the way, so many problems, n plus one, overfetching, and so many more. But I want you all to just discover it yourselves. But however, the one you're seeing right now on your screen is a GraphQL query, and it basically fetch all the users and return the ID and the email, right? So this is the syntax of the GraphQL query. And if we do that in GROQ, basically it's pretty much the same in a way that it can do that. It has an expressive filtering, projections. You can also do joins. I hope I'll be able to give an example of that. But here, it's pretty much the same. The asterisk denotes everything. Inside the square brackets, we have some filters, and we use the curly brackets, which is pretty much the same with GraphQL. I'm saying pretty much the same a lot here. ID and email. So right, yeah, great, right? So instead of creating a GraphQL layer for your app, server, client, I don't know, I don't care, but yeah, just GROQ it. We used to kind of like we kind of like think that, oh, how can we kind of like make our app modern? How do we transform things? I'm not done playing GraphQL here, but a GROQ is a good alternative, and if you want to kind of like just explore it, and you'll find it really awesome. I think it's really awesome. So yeah, and here's why through examples. So let's take a look at our data. But here, so here right now, we have here in the left, we have basically Pokemon's data, JSON. they have this stats. They have this ID. They have this name: English, Japanese, Chinese, French. They have this Pokemon type, which is grass or can be poison. They have the stats as well for this, base, HP, attack. So this is based from the Pokemon API. Um, here, so Poke API. So here, basically, I just grabbed some results here, and we have this JSON here loaded up here using the script. So so at least kind of like have an idea what we're kind of like working on through our example in the slides. So yeah, so let's begin. So our task first is to find all Pokemon of grass type and together with their stats. So in GraphQL, we kind of like if we have some kind of GraphQL layer, this is how the syntax looks like. So we have Pokemons, you pass in some filter inside, depending on the type, pass in an object, because that our kind of like our type is in a type array, so we kind of like use the in to signify that we only want to kind of, if there's grass in the array, so we kind of like return it, right? And here we have some projections, so I want to return the name, and the name will be derived from the name.english and the base stats, so HP, attack, defense, the SB attack, so basically just this um, object here. So that's how you do it in GraphQL. Same results. Yeah. So in GROQ, it's basically just this. So from here to this, you have the same thing. Asterisk denotes everything. Inside the square brackets are filters. You have the grass in type. So you have basically almost the same grass. I'm in the syntax here in GraphQL, but it's shorter. It's much more concise, and yeah, and then it's great, right? So yeah, so that's it. You have name, and you can also kind of like break this down if you want to kind of like do some projections here, like denoted in this curly brackets. You can go in that path. It's basically up to you, but if we kind of like use only the base object here, then it will return all the data that are there. But in GraphQL, we need to kind of like use the sub selection, so we need to kind of like do that. All right. Okay. Next example. Number 2. Find all Pokemon of grass type together with their stats and order results by their speed in descending order. Okay. So find all Pokemon a grass type and their stats, and you order their speed in descending order. So this is how you're gonna do it in GraphQL. So you have you have these sorts, call this, and you have this filter with sort here on the left. This one you have filter here in grass type, uh, the same with what we have in our previous slides, but we added this sort thing. Yep, and yeah, this is the same too with the previous slide. In GROQ, here's what I'm gonna do. Here is pretty much the same before, like it was in the previous slides. But then we have here this pipe operator signified with this, kind of like pipe sign. One, and if you kind of get to translate this, all this data coming from here will be piped down into this order function, which takes a look at the first argument would be the base speed, and we specify here that it is descending, and then it basically does its job. It's the same with how we gonna work it out in GraphQL. So if we kind of like want to try that here, let's try that. why not, Demo? So here, so we're gonna can click this around. So we have here name, subtile, Pokemon website count, and we order our results, by the way, using the base speed. So in descending order. So we have here 120. Now it goes down to 116. We have here 113, 113, 110, uh, 109, and it goes down pretty much everything. Uh, yeah. So going back, yeah, this is kind of like how you do it in GROQ, and it's pretty awesome. It's pretty cool. Let's go with the last example. Find the total count of Pokemon type grass type. So grass type total count. So that's our clue words here. And in GROQ, you just need to kind of like do it this way. And so we just want to kind of like if we try that, right? So we able to get the count, and we can also specify however we want this. So this basically just say it's total count. So yeah, total count, total Pokemon type, total Pokemon of grass type count. So that's pretty verbose right there, but pretty much returns the data that you wanted. So you can also, customize this, pass some filters, because remember, everything inside the square brackets is a filter. So we can say the user ID is equal to 2. So we can also do that. And then, oh, there's no grass Pokemon in 2. This really odd. But anyhow, so let's not waste our time there. Let's go forward. All right. So we can learn more about this group here using the documentation at sanity.io. And why can't I click this? This is what? So we can go to GROQ. Let's go to the documentation so that at least you know your way around here. And I introduced this. So GraphQL relational queries, object relational queries. So we have here some operators. So you here you're gonna be able to understand true and true, translate to true. So yeah, uh, you have some functions. Maybe you want some count. You wanted to do some daytime. Coalesce and define identity. And there's so many more. And here this is a guide for you to understand the syntax. Yeah, so if you really wanna read this, you'll be able to grasp about. And yeah, so you have some joins here, you have some pipes, data types. So you have string, number, boolean, float, so much your data. But don't be afraid, because GROQ is if you give it time, if you give them kind of like don't discourage yourself, because this is kind of like I don't want to learn this stuff, because it's only me that or only a few set of people that we're gonna want to learn this. And GraphQL is pretty awesome, it's pretty popular. If I work in GraphQL, then I can relate to a lot of developers out there. you know it's up really up to you, but this is part of me to convincing you to give it a try. It's pretty much saved me when I was working, doing some multi filtering in my project. So I think it's pretty useful in a way. So you need to kind of like just specify in a way when you have some JSON data return from your API. So kind of just describe how you want your data to be returned or transformed, and it works great. So yeah, that's the group documentation, and you can go there. And yeah, this is basically why the reason the best way to learn is to try it. It's pretty much scary at first, but then it will make sense as soon as you get the hang of things. So yep. And this cheat sheet, by the way, um, why does it work? This cheat sheet, by the way, this one. They have some pretty examples here that you can kind of like try to kind of like go through each of this, and you'll be able to kind of like understand what this means, etc., etc. So we have here title in array, so this is working with arrays. We have here some less than, greater than, this is our comparison operators. We have here some object accessing, a nested object. Get rid of slug, the current. We want to kind of like want to you'll be able to do that. You have here also an array of, what you call this, an array data coming from cast members, and you access all that person key or property there in those array of data. Um, you can do that. You can also mm, you can have do it in a path where the ID matches an A, B, C, that D. This is kind of like a really deep object. That's that object here. So you have pretty much the same, a lot of things here. You can do some pagination, by the way. You can do some ordering. You can do joins, like if you have some kind of, you want to join two kinds of data, you can do that. Projections here, which is kind of like I only want this kind of field to be returned. You can also create a new field right there from the data, or use some functions there to create the data however you want. There's some special variables, conditionals, so a lot of things, but it's pretty great, really. Hope it makes sense. I hope I'm kind of like giving you some insights here. Right. So in summary, by the way, I said earlier that it's a GraphQL alternative, right? Um, that's how I see it. But the most people, like the team at Sandy, especially not here. He told me, but um, I think I was taught like it's an SQL for your JSON, and I couldn't agree more, because in the at the end of the day, I was like I've been thinking a lot of things, how to call it, etc., etc. But the reason why I was able to say that, because that is how I experience it, and basically just my opinion. But then the way they kind of like how they wanted this to work, how they designed this, is for be able to kind of like do SQL in your JSON, and it's pretty much do whatever you want without creating the standard schema. Just basically work on your JSON, and it's at the and you have it there, right? So how do you get started today? You can use this in your projects. You can have the GraphQL CLI. I mean GraphQL CLI. Sorry, GROQ CLI, and you can install this. Also, we have here a group that group JS, and yeah, this is here. They have some documentations there. I guys, please check it out. So many things in my head, huh? But thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this talk. I hope I was able to do some making sense here talking. It's pretty hard, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Dorell.
Right.
So
Questions?
uh, let's see if we have questions. Uh, I think I think that um,
Okay.
yes, I have a question. Yes, that's cool. Thank you for like comparing it with GraphQL. So I have a question. Let's if our data is stored like in a database,
Yes.
for example, Postgres or other databases, how would you approach querying them with Grok, or would you not advise it?
Okay.
Just purely
So,
for JSON.
uh, yeah. I'm not sure if there's some sort of driver there to kind of like if you connect to the database, you have some sort of driver to be able to kind of exchange information, right? So far, to the best of my knowledge, there is none at the moment. They kind of like they really designed this to work with JSON. So however big your JSON data is, it pretty fast to kind of like parse it, and transform your data in a way. So if you want to kind of like really work on that, I think the best route for you there is um, just work with a HTTP API if you have some with not really directly accessing the
Mhm.
database data. So at least in your HTTP API, you can uh, give response in JSON format. So by then you can able to work, okay, you use GROQ here from there and do whatever you like.
Yeah, that's one thing that you can do with GraphQL, right? Because with
Yeah,
GraphQL, you can write resolvers that query the database or something.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah. I
that's the
agree.
only question I have.
But then, yeah, but then the thing here with GraphQL is that we will start
Have to
working
make
with
a
the schema,
schema.
SDL, right? So but here you don't need to do that. Just you get the data from the API and transform it however you want it. So I think it saves you time there.
Yeah, true. If you have the JSON data already.
Yep, yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have one more question. I
Sure,
didn't
sure.
check GROQ CLI yet,
Yeah.
but because with on like my personal like workflows like on use cases, I tend
Mm-hmm.
to like test HTTP APIs from my terminal, and
Mm-hmm.
then when they return JSON, I use a tool called JQ to
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah. I heard that.
to like get or extract specific information from that response. Can GROQ CLI do that also?
Yep.
Okay, nice. Maybe I'll
Yeah,
try
you can try
using
it.
Grok
Yeah, try
from
it.
the GROQ CLI.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice. Okay, that's all for me.
Okay. Thank you.
It seems we don't have any other
Question.
questions, so
Give me the
so
rest.
we'll just end it here for now. And I hope you guys watching learned something from today's episode, and see you next
Yeah.
week for more topics from us. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so that you get updates when we like go live again next time. And that's it for today. See you next week. Bye
See you
bye.
next week. Bye bye.